Hi everybody, I'd like to just kind of update my view about judges as far as that view relates to parental alienation cases. So in the past I have been critical of judges, and I don't take any of that back at all. However, I have come to the view that the problem is not so much with judges being weak or giving what Sir James Mumby referred to as flabby judicial responses. I mean, that's still a massive problem. We know that only 1 or 2% of all court orders that judges make are actually enforced by those judges. So that remains a criticism, of course. But the real problem, it seems to me, upon further reflection, is that judges simply do not accept that parental alienation exists. So what a classic view of that seems to be is that English judges tend to think of parental alienation as American twaddle. Now, I guess in England sometimes we look over the pond and it seems that everybody's got a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counsellor or a therapist or something like that, and we kind of tend not to do that. We have something else called friends, but you know, that's just our thing. Maybe we should all have psychiatrists and counsellors, and you know, we'd all be a lot better off. But be that as it may, the point is that we, and particularly the more conservative amongst us, I think we can probably count judges in there, tend to look at some things that come from America and regard them with a certain amount of suspicion, unfortunately. Or at least unfortunately in some cases. Part of the problem arises with parental alienation with it being called a syndrome, and judges generally don't like anything that sounds vaguely syndrome-y. So a lot of the problem seems to come from the names that we use. Judges won't recognise parental alienation syndrome in the UK, and indeed nor does the psychiatric and psychological professions. So we need to steer clear of using the word syndrome. And even when we talk about parental alienation, perhaps we ought to think about using a lowercase p and a lowercase a. But of course the point is that parental alienation exists, whether you like it or not. It's kind of a bit like I guess I'd call it the Linford's lunchbox test. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, Linford Christie sued a guy, I forget his name anyway. He was an ex-prisoner who came out and decided to become a journalist, and he was saying in, I think, a magazine called Spiked, that Linford Christie was taking performance-enhancing drugs. Now, it doesn't really matter whether that's true or not for these purposes, but the point is that during the course of the defamation action that ensued, Mr. Justice Popplewell, I think it was, asked, "What is Linford's lunchbox?" Now, some of our younger readers might not remember that, but at the time everybody knew exactly what Linford's lunchbox was, except of course High Court judges. I'll leave you to Google that. The point is that, you know, judges are not always in step with what's going on in the real world. So whether we call it parental alienation, or whether, as Mrs. Justice Parker did in Re H, we call it parental manipulation or coercion, or as Dr. Craig Childress calls it, let's just call it Bob, whatever we call it, the fact is that it exists, and we all know as alienated parents that this is true. So until that message is truly understood by judges, we're not going to get anything done. And we know this because we've had a few surveys in now on the UCAP website, and one of the respondents to that survey gave a very useful answer, and he said that he had received a psychologist's report that had taken something like 19 hours, that the alienating parent was diagnosed with the highest marks you can get for narcissism, and child abuse was also diagnosed according to the criteria in our version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So you think, hey, great, that's fantastic. We've got the best psychology report in the world. That's really encouraging. The judge just dismissed it and said, this is all American waffle. This is an American thing. So yeah, there would have been a time, I'm sure, where the same kind of conservative, some might say parochial approach to life in general meant that a man would have been derided for saying that slavery was wrong, or that women should have the vote, or that I refer in the website to the situation with Alan Turing, who, as you will know, was one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, helped to crack the German Enigma code, and just a genius, basically. But he was also homosexual, and he was convicted in 1952 of gross indecency, was chemically castrated, and 2 years later took his own life. The point of all this is that what looks crazy today becomes mainstream tomorrow. Today's liberalism becomes tomorrow's conservatism, essentially. So Stephen Wildblood, for example, His Honour Judge Stephen Wildblood, talks in his address to Families Need Fathers about the fact that 37 years ago, the prevailing view was that you never put a child, as a judge, you never put a child with a same-sex couple unless there was literally no alternative, because same-sex couples were engaging and indulging in what was thought of as a perversion. And again, this is stuff that we all, same-sex marriage and so on, it's all pretty everyday and pretty mainstream now. What he asks, rightly, is how are we going to be thinking about all this when we look back in 37 years' time and consider how the system is handling parental alienation cases right now? Are we not surely going to be outraged at the way the system treats alienated parents and allows the continuing psychological and emotional abuse of our children? Well, let's hope it doesn't take us 37 years to find out. The point of all this really is that judges need really to just open their minds and get with the program. The same thing applies to CAFCAS, but we'll do another video on that. So yeah, there are lots of improvements we can think of as far as judges are concerned, but getting in step is one of them. Now, it wouldn't be fair to tar all judges with the same brush, and as we've mentioned elsewhere. If you look at Court of Appeal decisions and High Court decisions, you will see the notion of parental alienation being referred to as mainstream. And yeah, maybe in the High Court and the Court of Appeal it is mainstream. It doesn't seem, though, to quite have filtered down to the lower courts. That's, what we all experience as alienated parents every day, and experts' reports are thrown out as being American twaddle. There's another case, for example, where Dr. Ludwig Lowenstein, who sadly is no longer with us, refers somewhere on his website to having been instructed back in the day as an expert for one of the parties in a parental alienation case, and there was also an expert on behalf of the other party as well, because back in those days each side got their own expert. Now there's usually just one appointed expert, and both of these experts said, yeah, one parent is alienating the child from the other parent, but the judge still did nothing. And another commentator on our website said, for example, that at the beginning of his case, the judge said to him, well, Mr. X, I might believe everything you say, but still leave the child where he is. And indeed, that is what happened. That's exactly what happened. So, judges need to get with the program, please. That's just going to be a matter of it's going to be a matter of education, I guess, for judges, but it's not so much telling them anything that they don't know, because judges all know all this stuff anyway. It's just that they just don't like the label parental alienation. So if you're thinking of embarking on the merry-go-round, because that's what it is, it's essentially a lottery. If you're thinking of embarking on the merry-go-round of the legal process, our advice remains: do not mention parental alienation. That's a top tip. Don't talk about enmeshment or artificial empowerment of the child or anything like that. There is only room for one smart aleck in the court, and I'm afraid, guys, it ain't you. So just give the judge the facts and let him or her make up their own mind as to what those facts amount to. Thank you.